Hello everyone. In this video, I want to go to learn about what is the architecture of Kubernetes. Kubernetes cluster has one or more control panels and one or more compute nodes. Overall, the control plane is responsible for managing the overall cluster, exposing the application program interface, and for scheduling the initiation and shutdown of compute nodes based on the desired configuration. Each of the compute nodes run on container runtime like Docker along with the agent kubelet, which communicate with the control plane. Each node can be bare metal server or on premises or cloud-based virtual machine. And what are the Kubernetes architecture components? The main components is node, image registry, pods, and we learn about nodes. Nodes are the virtual machines or physical server that host containerized application. Each node has cluster and can run on one or more application instance. There can be as few as one node. However, the typical Kubernetes cluster will have several nodes. And in image registry, container images are kept in the registry and transferred to nodes by the control plane for executing container pods. Pods are where containerized application run. They can include one or more container and are small unit of deployment for application in a Kubernetes cluster. So now we learn about what is a Kubernetes control panel architecture. So in this Kubernetes control panel is a control panel for the Kubernetes cluster. It components include IP, AIP server, etc for the database, kube scheduler, kube controller management, replication controller. These are the components, and we learn about it. So we firstly know about what is API server. In the Kubernetes, API is the front end of the Kubernetes control plane and is how user interact with the Kubernetes cluster. The API is the interface used to manage, create, and configure Kubernetes cluster. And in the etcd, it is a database. The key value store where the data related to the cluster is stored. It is the highly valuable and consistent since all the access to easily through the API server and in the kube scheduler when a pod is created. This component assists to a node for execution based on resource requirement policies and affinity specialization regarding geological geolocation and interface with the other workloads. And after that, kube controller manager. Kube Kubernetes cluster has several control functions. There are all completed into the single binary known as kube controller manager. Controller function includes in this program include application controller, ensure the correct number of ports is in the existence for each application pod run in the cluster. Node controller. Node controller is used to control the cluster and the health issue. So In the node controller, monitors the health of the each node and notify the cluster when nodes come online or become unresponsive or offline. Endpoint controller connects ports and services to populate the endpoint object. Service count and token controller, cloud controller management, node controller, route controller, service controller. These are the controllers. Node in the node controller, you also know very well detailed status of the cloud-based node that has stopped responsibly. If the node is stopped or AC is working or offline, uh, this is a feature of the node controller. Route controller in established route in the cloud provide infrastructure. This is for the infrastructure. Infrastructure. Service controller manage cloud providers load balancing. This is for the use for the load balancing, how high load high and how load is low or this is high. If the load is high, then the other server is running and the previous one is stopped. And what is the Kubernetes node architecture? In this kubelet, kubeproxy, container runtime, these are the components. In kubelet, every node has an agent called kubenet. It ensures that the container described in a pod specs are up and running properly. In kube proxy, a node proxy on each node that maintains network nodes, which allows for the communication for pods to network session whether inside or outside the cluster. And in the container runtime, software responsible for running the containerization application. Although Docker is the most popular, Kubernetes supports any runtime that addresses to the Kubernetes CRI. CRI is the container runtime interface. What are the other Kubernetes infrastructure components? The components are pods, development, replica set, cluster DNS, container response, resource monitoring. These are the components. So as we learned previous, what are the pods? Pods are the most basically execution unit of a Kubernetes application. Each pod contains the code and storage response required for execution and has its own IP address. Pod include configuration options as well. Typically, a pod contains single container for few containers or few containers that are computed into an application or business application and that share a set of response and data. And in deployment, a method of deploying containerization application pods, a desired state describes a development. Deployment will cause control to change the actual state of the cluster to achieve that state in the ordinary manner. Learn more about the Kubernetes developments, replica set, cluster DNS, and container response monitoring. These are the components of the Kubernetes infrastructure. So in the replica set, ensure that the specific number of identical pods are running at a given point in a time. And in the cluster DNS, server DNS records need to operate Kubernetes services. And container response monitoring, capture and record container metrics in the central database. So in this video, you'll learn about what is the infrastructure of Kubernetes and thanks for watching this video. If you learn more about Kubernetes, please watch the playlist of Kubernetes. Thank you.